feeling good, can I tell?
Okay, Hotel family, my name is Brother Larry.
Hotel.
We'd like to welcome everyone to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Amos Wilson, Ohio's Malik Ashabaz, Attorney Alton Maddox, Brother Assad, Louis Ray Rivera, Gil Noble, Professor George Simmons, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Mansardova, Miss Leola Maddox, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune. I mean, good jobs. They could have went the other route, but they chose a long road of teaching history that is not taught in schools, that the system wants you to know. They didn't go that way. They went beyond the call of duty. So we never want to let these historians be forgotten. You know, people run around talking about DeSantis and this and that, but the real history is in the books that Dr. Monderson and all these people that's still here to carry on the work of Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and Amos. So we're going to bring the camera over to the Amos collection, African World Info Systems, to help Brother Sababu to continue the great work of Amos Wilson. Blueprint for Black Power. Sababu's latest in honor of Amos, the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat toward a reclamation of the African mind. Amos classic, Black on Black violence, the psychodynamic of black self-annihilation in service of white domination. And you hear every big city mayor, every congressman, every senator, and every phony baloney talking about the problems of black youth and black on black violence. Not white on white violence, but black on black violence. But they never mention Amos's classic. They leave that blank, you know. So we have these books. The psychology, the developmental psychology of the black child, where you start from the beginning and raise your children through Amos's work. Issues of manhood in black and white. Right there in the thing, right there in the black case. The falsification of African consciousness. African-centered consciousness versus the New World Order. And you hear everything about the New World Order, every Instagram and the New World Order. Amos wrote that book years and years ago. It's never mentioned. Awakening the natural genius of black children. Confronting the color crisis in the African diaspora. Earl Ponder, who left us too soon. Revealing the unspeakable Bible verses, Judaism, Christianity, and the Holy Trinity. S.K. Damiano, Distorted Truths, and Louis Ray Rivera. From our Marcy Project. Louis Ray Rivera, when Professor Mackey left us too soon, Louis Ray Rivera would come down here and he would talk for hours. And we would walk him home and he'd still talk for another hour and a half. This book, Jazz in Jail, in honor of Brother Louis Ray Rivera. So those books are in honor of the Amos collection. In honor of Brother Harold, The Transfer Agreement by Edwin Black, the untold story of the secret pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine. See, they got the books, but those books they're not going to teach you in school. They ain't teaching that in the Florida school system. You got to get that on your own. Cynthia McKinney, who I believe is the only person that cared about the people of Georgia when China sneezes from the coronavirus lockdown to the global political economic crisis. Cynthia McKinney did an excellent job. Dr. Ben, black man that are now and his family. They didn't have too many computers. And they sure ain't gonna teach this in the Florida school system. You gotta get this on your own and show your children. Worrying about the census. Ayokamati, Jews are the problem. This is a small read by the irritated genie out of Washington, D.C. Gave up a six-figure job to go on the warpath of history. This is an excellent book. Small read, but the footnotes in the book is unbelievable. Where's the other one? Medicine. It's in the back. Dr. McCullough and Ronald Cummings, COVID-19, and Robert Kennedy, the real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the global war on democracy and public health. Going back in that plastic thing and see if you see the book called Medicine by Dr. Whitaker. Edward Down, Causes Unknown. The epidemic of sudden death in 2021, 2022, 2023. And when you see a lot of people that's all of a sudden dropping dead from cardiac arrest, get Edward Down's book and read it. And make your own conclusion. So the publication, and they're not gonna teach this in, ain't no school system nowhere. And he used to be an analyst for BlackRock. Our brother out of Atlanta, Medicine, MEDISIN, the causes and solution to disease, malnutrition, and the medical sins that are killing the world. Dr. Scott Whitaker and Jose Fleming, this book is unbelievable. And he's working on another book, so it's going to be real good. So we have these books. And the books are for you to get them. Do your research and learn as much as possible. So I'm going to read a couple of announcements on what's going on throughout the global black community in New York and the tri-state area. First of all, the people that came out, give yourself a big hand. For supporting the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club, and give yourself a big hand for the people that's our Zoom audience. These are the people that care about history, that care about education, because they want to hear that's not going to be taught in some school. That's what historians are for. Okay, Thursday, tomorrow, on Thorough Black Talk, tag Keisha, Brother Ashe, Brother Black, and Sister Marcia. Thursday, that's YouTube. Thorough Black Talk on Facebook. Saturdays at 10:30, our Philadelphia Connection with Sister Empress Chi and the Million Women's March. That's Blog Talk Radio. That comes on Saturday at 10:30. And our Philadelphia family, Brother Lamumba and Sister Ashe, and the speakers she have on there, they're doing it up. The number is 527-6189. Saturday nights at 10:30. I thank my wife for correcting me. While everybody trying to get their groove on and get back into the groove of dancing and partying and whatever else you want to call it, Sister Filet and the Philadelphia family is doing it up on Blog Talk Radio, and you can actually call in and ask the speakers any kind of questions and give your opinion. So we salute Empress G and our Philadelphia connection. Ayo Kamati. Mondays at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sankofa Revolutionary Radio. WSYP 95.1 FM out of Birmingham, Alabama. Brother Anthony Mohammed, the irritated genie, Ayo Kamati, author of Jews Are the Problem and War on the Horizon. He has a call-in show. He's kicking it live. That's information, Mondays, and you can call into that program and give your information. Our Baltimore connection, Brother Darren Muhammad, and his State of the City. Sometimes he comes on Wednesday, Thursday, but State of the City, 1590 Glen Burnie out of Baltimore, Maryland. And it's also on Instagram under State of the City, Darren Muhammad. And he comes on Facebook Live. That's Saturday at 12 o'clock. Brother Darren is kicking it live in the State of the City. Good brother, and I think he'll be on tomorrow at 7 o'clock on Facebook Live. Every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, your immunity program with Dr. Aline. Your immunity program with Dr. Aline comes on 7 o'clock on Tuesdays, and that brother is kicking out some good information on the jab. Excellent information. He was on yesterday, and good program. Also, the African Echo Study Group out of Newark, New Jersey. Brother Trust Graham, Brother True and Danny, and the gang out of Newark. They're doing the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat toward the reclamation of the African mind. That's Amos Classic. Brother Trust is the mediator of that study group. And you put your information in there, and Brother True, who was on, he'll get in touch with you and send you the link. Also, out of Asbury Park, the Know Thyself study group, also with Brother True and the brothers out of Asbury Park. Our Brother Trust Graham is also the mediator of this study group. That comes on that Saturday at 1:30. So the information is there. Also, the Semotap organization with Brother James McIntosh, Sister Richardine Theodore. That's Minefield. That comes on WBAI 99.5 every Wednesday from 2 to 3. And they had an excellent program this Saturday in honor of Dr. Clark. It was unbelievable. So we want to thank the Semotap organization with Sister Betty Dobson, James McIntosh, and Richard D. Theodore, and everybody involved with Semotap. So family, you log on to WBAI from 2 to 3 every Wednesday for the Minefield program with Dr. James McIntosh. Now also, Community Cop with Mike Graves, Noah Lita, Julian Harper. You can go on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. That's every Tuesday at 5 o'clock. And you can bring in all the programs that they have and do your own research. All programs from the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club are on YouTube under BK William Mackey Jr. So you could go in under YouTube, BK William Mackey Jr. and all our lectures will come up, and if you don't believe the speaker, you pull up the lecture and you do your own research. Anytime you don't believe anybody, you do your own research. You read your books, and that's how you find out. The Marcus Garvey 82nd Annual Day Parade and Celebration, August 17th, at Marcus Garvey Park, West 124th Street and 5th Avenue. Come out and support the Marcus Garvey Annual Parade. So, these are events that we have for the community to look in and see what's going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, our speaker, Dr. Monderson, his lectures is on YouTube under the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. and they're on YouTube under Dr. Fred Mendelson. Ladies and gentlemen, give a great big hand. His topic will be the 25th anniversary of Samuel Carson and his bones in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, give a great big hand to noted scholar and historian who's carrying the work of the great Dr. Ben. Not too many people is following Dr. Ben, what he told them to do. But I have it firsthand that Dr. Monderson is following. Give a great big hand to Dr. Ben.
My brother, all right, okay. So, good afternoon family, good afternoon Zoom, good afternoon those in the house. My name is Frederick Monderson, and I'm here to discuss the 25th anniversary of the bones of Samuel Carson. You may ask, who was Samuel Carson? Well, Samuel Carson was an enslaved African in South Carolina who escaped and joined the U.S. Navy. He fought in the Mexican War of 1844. He was killed and buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. At the time, the Brooklyn Navy Yard was a segregated black cemetery. I will show you later some evidence of some of the people who were actually buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I have the name of a Marine that was buried there in 1801. I have in my possession some 250 names of black veterans that were buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It's interesting because in the progeny of Samuel Carson, there was always a story about, quote unquote, the myth of the runaway. But it was simply a myth because there was not substantial, satisfactory evidence to link him with his progeny in today's world. In 1995, the U.S. Navy found the bones of Samuel Carson where he was buried and turned these over to his nephew, Samuel Carson. His nephew, Sonny Carson. Pardon my French. Sonny used the bones in a number of protest movements across the city. Remember now, this is a time of gross police brutality, economic deprivation, and a lot of stuff coming out of the 90s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s in New York City especially, and also across the country. Now that my brother is back, I would like him to focus it on at least two images of newspaper reports that I saved from my time at writing for the black press in New York City. In my experience, I wrote over 1,000 pieces for them. They never paid me a dime. But that's besides the point. I was doing the work that I was commissioned to do by Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Leonard James. First of all, so brother, if you can get this, it says, African burial ground uncovered in Brooklyn. And we have here in the photograph Professor Patterson, Brother James Small, Sonny Carson, Ateem Ferguson, and one of the Navy Yard's assistant. In 1997, Panafest, the festival in Africa, decided to honor the bones of the runaway that will ultimately, by the next year, be repatriated back into Ghana. So, as I indicated, Sonny used the bones in a casket to march around the city highlighting problems that were affecting his people in the city, in Brooklyn or Manhattan or wherever at the time. I went to Sonny Carson, I took my resume, and I said to him, I want to work with you, and I gave him my papers. He looked it over because I didn't want to, there be any questions as to my integrity, and he accepted me. He formed the Bones Committee, and I became the chairman. There were some 25 members of the Bones Committee. The principals were Sonny, of course, G2 Williamson. I'm online now. I hope you look at Sonny Carson, G2 Wilson, Professor Smalls, and some other people who were active members of the Bones Committee determining where to place the bones. Many argued we should place him in Arlington National Cemetery, but we ultimately came to the conclusion that he should be returned back to Africa. And this was a rather monumental decision on the part, especially by Sonny Carson. So he formed the Bones Committee, in which I was the chairman. There were some 25 members of that committee who met to strategize and plan, sometimes 2 or 3 times per week, and especially on Sunday morning for breakfast at McDonald Street, not Mickey D, but there was a restaurant on McDonald Street off of Stuyvesant where we met and discussed not simply the bones, but contemporary issues that are affecting our people. There was one time this basketball player, I found it so funny, Sprewell. You people out there in the basketball world probably know him. He slapped this guy named Popovich, the coach, and so he wanted to give him an award, but it never materialized. So that was the highlight of that particular day. Anyway, the bones were ultimately repatriated back to Ghana and buried on August 1st, 1998. Ray, if you would just turn to this illustration here. This is a piece that I wrote for the Daily Challenge, and what it's a centerfold, and it's rather famous. And there are none others in the United States. So if you people with deep pockets want one of these, this one can be purchased for, let's say, $25,000. Okay, so what we have here is, one, the bones leaving an institutional church on Delphi Avenue in Brooklyn. It arrives at a ceremony at Prospect Park that was held in the Drummers Grove. a few days before the bones were shipped. Sonny inspects the casket coming out of the hearse. He says, "Bring him out." Chief Barkin Parker gives Sonny the walk into the court. The bone stands alone. The brothers stand on guard. Sonny salutes the bones and said, "Let's take him home." A kid, this great drummer Ashraf, he passed. This kid decides to lead us out, and we left Prospect Park, and within 48 hours, the bones were on a plane departing for Ghana, West Africa. It is interesting because not only is this object not seen in this country, and not only was the burial not seen in this country, though it was seen in Germany, the bones had to be tricked. Well, let's put it this way. The custom official that was supposed to inspect the coffin didn't want the coffin to be boarded onto the plane. So a diversion was created, and while he was distracted, the bones were put on the plane, and before you know it, he was on his way. So Samuel Carson was buried in Ghana at a place called Asinmanso, besides a river where Africans were given their last bath before they were shipped overseas through the door of no return. There was an enslaved African female named Crystal from Jamaica who was shipped to Ghana, and she was buried beside him. So these are a couple that are buried in this site that Sonny hoped to be a place of reflection, a site of pilgrimage for African Americans seeking their heritage in Africa. You should go there first, and then wherever else your search leads you to. What is significance of Samuel Carson's return is that, and you are familiar with the phrase, the door of no return. This is where, from the river at Asinmanso, these Africans were given their last bath, and then in the castle, they were marched through this door of no return. Sure. Well, we'll see you in the new world. So what Sonny did in returning Samuel Carson, his ancestor, was open the door of return. This was very significant. A number of African events were scheduled around this return. He was well received. The president of Ghana at the time was Jerry Rawlings, and he said two things. Well, he did one thing, and he said another that was significant. First, with the return of the bones assembled, he inaugurated the first Emancipation Day ceremony. So I was in Guyana earlier this year. I think it was in March, and I met an African group over there, and I saw they were struggling in terms of knowledge. So I donated a dozen books to them, and they were ecstatic. And this guy said to me, he says, "We have a ceremony here in August, and we have a tent and a booth and a table, and these books will be placed on the table so that people will know about them." He said, "Let me tell you about the first Emancipation Day ceremony." No, he said, "Well, let me tell you about the Emancipation Day ceremony that we celebrate." So I said, "Oh yeah? So what is it?" I said, "Hold on. Let me tell you, because it was my work that led to the origination of the first Emancipation Day ceremony, and today we are about 25 years into this celebration." So, Okay, as I told you that we're familiar with the door of no return, and that Sonny opened the door of return. Well, he returned back to the United States after giving a rousing welcome by all the chiefs and all heads of state officials and what have you. I was the one who did the photography at the Bones celebration in Prospect Park, and I took the photographs, I wrote the article, I had it published as a centerfold that weekend. The significance of this is that I signed my name here the day in which the burial was taking place. So there is a spiritual connection between this story, the burial, and my signature. I had a friend named Connie who said to me one day, he said, Fred, this is a historic event. You should put this in the Library of Congress. So I registered it with the Library of Congress. And I'm on the verge of donating a copy to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. But there are a number of other pieces that are supposed to go in with this, and there's one piece that is missing. That is to say, Dr. Leonard James wrote me a letter back in '97, and I typed up the content of the letter because the letter began to be frayed. I typed up the content of the letter, and I placed the letter somewhere, and I can't find it. It's in the house, you know. So I want that letter to go in with the other things, because there's a famous piece that I brought out of my service years in the war that has got about nearly 100 names of black servicemen who were in there. And it's interesting because I never made the connection until now of are you watching the show?
Give me the phone, I answer.
Yeah. Did you say, you must have sent her the image.
How you doing,
okay. So, black veterans buried in Brooklyn Navy Yard Hospital Cemetery. Okay. So, that fist is in line with this, and I never made the connection until right now where I got this inspiration. So, with this done, we ask, who was Sonny Carson? Well, Sonny Carson was a Brooklyn activist. He had his roots in South Carolina, but he was raised in New York City. He was a part of that youthful image of urban America in the 1950s and 60s. Sonny was a thug. He was a pimp.
Bad boy.
He was a drug dealer. He was a gang member, and he went to jail.
Yes,
He was a Korean War veteran.
Tell him to move.
There is a movie called The Education of Sonny Carson.
Right.
Alright? Now, it's interesting, I'll just jump ahead. Now, after his passing in 2003, I wrote a book on Sonny, and I entitled it Sonny Carson, The Final Triumph. And in my view, the final triumph was the repatriation of Samuel Carson back to Ghana. Everybody wanted a copy of the book. I didn't surrender that, but I ended up writing 3 additional books about Sonny. 4 books that are in the Library of Congress, and I started a 5th book about things that I wrote about him that were published, including the event that took place at the City Council when Community Board 3 in Brooklyn in Bed-Stuy voted to name a street after Sonny. Gates Avenue, from Carson, I think, to Nostrand. And everybody was there. I wrote a piece on that, published it, and I listed all the names of all the big blacks, important people who were there to support this naming. And the speaker, Christine Quinn, she brought up a few blacks who voted against naming the street for Sunny Cross. And one of them was this guy out in Queens, I think he's a state senator now. He's like,
From here?
I can't remember his name, but I have here in my possession a number of pieces that Sonny himself wrote to the newspaper that was published. This one is called, it's all about economics. When Giuliani was able, Rudy Giuliani, you know the famous guy, was able to buy off people like Congressman Towns and Floyd Flake, who after a while they started calling him Floyd Fake because he was more interested in other than what we expected of him. So this gentleman, who is today a state senator, sided with Christine Quinn to vote against Sonny having a street name in his honor. But that's after he had passed. And the significant thing, which I find a truth statement, when Mary Pinkett, she was the first black woman elected to the New York City Council. And she passed, and there was a commemoration ceremony for her at McDavis College. And Reverend Jones of Bethany Baptist, he did the benediction, and he spoke about Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, who said, "L'état c'est moi." He says, "I am the state." He was that big, right? And he said, when the bishop ascended, that I get the name, perhaps for Graves could give me the name of that high location in the church where the steps are, where you could climb to have a panoramic view of the entire church. But when he climbed those stairs and he looked out, he saw all the dignitaries of France in attendance. And he said, "You are what you are. When you lay on that slab, it's all over. You cannot do anything else. But what you have done," I remember a few weeks ago, Brother Graves did a wonderful piece on Alton Matters.
Yes, sir.
He did what he had to do, and his time came. So he was what he was. And Sonny was what he was because he was involved in a number of different issues that affected his constituency. As an African man, wherever you are, that's a part of your constituency. So when Sonny came out of prison, he was a changed man. He looked around, and what did he see? If you can remember, there was an age, I call it the age of Woolworths, where these department stores were scattered all over the African community, but no Africans were working there. So Sonny, especially on the Fulton Street corridor, Sonny began to agitate and bring people together and say to the owners of these establishments, if we can shop here, we can work here. And if you will let us work here, we're going to boycott you. So that began his history of boycotts that never ended until he died. And he also began advocating for mom and pop stores that those little storefronts that black people could sell candy and newspapers and small other things, and there was sometimes a not legal product that came out of those mom and pop stores. But what would happen ultimately is that the mom and pop stores would be forced out of business because interest came into the community and pushed them out. You know, some of our younger people can probably remember in the 1970s, there was a movie called The Liberation of L.B. Jones.
Yes.
Right, The Liberation of L.B. Jones. And one person was speaking to L.B. and he said, you know, the three traditional black businesses were liquor store, funeral homes, and the numbers. My daddy was a numbers brother. What we saw is that the states co-opted the numbers game. I mean, even I played in a number horn. I was in 766 for 2400, but that's the only time I made it. Liquor stores. Today, blacks don't own liquor stores. It's taken over by Koreans and other people. And certainly the funeral parlors, we've lost control. There's still a few, but even that. I mean, it's like, Maryland. What's Maryland famous for? Crabs, right? I was in Maryland once, visiting relatives, and I saw this big long line going around the corner. I wanted to know what was going on. And I turned back around, and there it was. I was looking at a store, a crab store, and all of these blacks were all lined up. And I said, what's going on in there? They said, they make good crabs. Well, who was making the good crabs? Koreans. Koreans were selling the crabs. They were serving the crabs. They were cleaning the dishes. We were only buying the crabs. So foreign entities have a tendency to come into our community and take over. Bob Law. There's a church on Park Place and Kingston Avenue in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, and Bob Law gave a presentation there one day, and he was talking about how fast foods are killing our people. So I was in attendance, and I decided to do a study. And I found from Fulton Street at Monderson Avenue to Eastern Parkway, there were something like 25 different fast food joints. And none of them were employed, this is in the heart of the black community, none of them were employing black people. And he was talking about how some of these foreign entities come, sell stuff to us and take the cash out of the community. And it was the time in which Councilman Charles Barron came in and gave the speech and said, let's forget about Mickey. We shouldn't be going to Florida because some entities in Florida are doing business in our community and they're not contributing anything. So the point is that Sonny Carson became an activist using the boycott, economic boycott tool to draw attention to inequities in the relationships that people come into our community and have. And most of his boycotts were on Nostrand, on Fulton, on Church Avenue, and particularly against Koreans who at that time were manning these vegetable and fruit stands all over the community. They made their money and then they disappeared, but not before they had made substantial gains at our expense. So I said that Sonny went to the movie, The Education of Sonny Carson, indicates how he went to jail for the last time. But not really the last time, because there are times after that. But he robbed this delivery guy, and they sent him to prison. Right? When he came out, he became this activist, and he started to become more visible in terms of advocating for his community, which was the African American community. So he became a full-fledged, what I call a full-fledged social activist. He was elected chairman of the Urban League, and he became interested in education as one of his principal interests. In New York City, there are over 1,000 schools, and it's predominantly peopled by Black and Spanish people. So Sonny began a movement of protest in Oceanville, Brownsville, claiming, rightfully so, that in this school system, there were too many or disproportionately represented Jewish and white teachers, principals, superintendents, administrators, and that there was hardly any Black teachers. So he wanted Black representation, and this led to the creation of decentralization of the Board of Education, and the beginning of school, the right of parents to vote about who would represent them on the board, and the board will ultimately decide which principals or which superintendents or which teachers should be appointed to administer to their children. So Sonny was involved in that aspect of education, and he took a lot of heat for that. So in a predominantly Black and Spanish school system, he felt there were too many white and Jewish principals, administrators, and teachers, and hardly any Blacks. Decentralization of school boards with parent involvement in voting, in selection of superintendents, principals, deputies, and teachers became the ultimate goal and reality. So again, the 1970s was an age of the crack epidemic, and Sonny fought the crack epidemic. He began creating organizations. One of his principal organizations was the Committee to Honor Black Heroes. The Committee to Honor Black Heroes became so instrumental that he was able to get the city council to name in Brooklyn Marcus Garvey Boulevard, Malcolm X Boulevard. And he laid the foundation for Fulton Street to be renamed Harriet Tubman Boulevard. So, all three of these streets, in time perspective, and there was another one, he was not really involved, the Hopkinson was changed to Boylan Street or whatever.
Right.
The entire length of the street was changed to these people. When Giuliani came in Rudy Giuliani, and he was very much afraid of Sonny Carson, because Sonny didn't really respect any people who didn't respect him and his people. He changed the renaming. You know, they've often said, when you learn the rules of the game, they change the game, or something to that effect. So what he did was that he said that you cannot have an entire street named after you. You could only have a block. And I will give you two street signs. One will be put up, and one can be given to the family. I know much about this because I was chairman of the board, chairman of the transportation committee in my board, Board 8 Northbound Heights. I changed 15 streets for local heroes, but he only gave us one block. You know, Giuliano is not really a nice fellow, right? Black Star newspaper did a ceremony in Harlem, and among the honorees was David Dinkins. And David Dinkins said, when Giuliani was elected mayor, and all of us know the story because in the black community, we found that there were these signs that says, Rudy G fights racism. So we followed him along into that rabbit hole. And he turned out to be so racist and brutal, he earned the moniker Rudy Brutaliano, or Brutaliani, or something like that. Brutal was attached to his name. He said that you could only have one street. But Dickens said that, okay, he, in the mayor's office, or in Gracie Mansion, there are images of past mayors, just like how our present mayor, Eric Adams, after he leaves office, they will paint the portrait of him and hang it up somewhere in that. Giuliani removed Dickens' photograph and put it in the back room. Well, you know, turned down with a rope, right? And now he's getting some of his comeuppance in these times. Anyway, so in addition to again, the Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, he also helped to name Toussaint Louverture Boulevard in Empire, and that's cool there. Empire, and I think it's either Empire and Troy. Right, so he was interested in, he was involved in actively remembering the names of our great heroes. In fact, I wrote a piece where I took all these people, and this guy came and commended me for that, and he said, man, I'm so happy you put Sonny's name into these, in the midst of these great historic figures. You know, I told you I wrote 1,000 pieces, I was like everything good. Going off the rails. Again, he founded an organization called Black Men Against Crack. So he was fighting the crack epidemic, and he didn't get no credit for that. Of course, if we go back to the 60s, Sonny's emergence had been so significant that there was a riot in Newark, and there were disturbances in New York City at a time when was it not Wagner? Who was his name? The mayor. Lindsay, right? So Lindsay sought out Sonny Carson as a hero of the black community and asked him to use his influence so that there wouldn't be too much disturbance in the city. Now, imagine that. And he did. Calm things. So that when we come now, years later, to have a street named in his honor, the city council balked and refused to vote on it. Or well, not vote on it, but they voted against it. He was a part of an organization called the December 12 Movement. The December 12 Movement, they accused him of some kind of kidnapping or whatever. But his fame had gotten so humongous that the police tell him, listen, Sonny, we want to charge you for kidnapping, but we want you to come in so we can charge you. We're not coming to get you. Yeah, you know, because we're afraid that you may go off the rails, you know. So, anyway, ultimately he was charged, arrested, and he sent to a prison called Dannemore. So while they were booking him downstairs, word circulated that Sonny Carson's downstairs, and the prison rioted. You don't arrest Sonny Carson. You know, well, he certainly felt he was bigger than most, right? I was in Harlem for the 30th anniversary. Everybody knows what like it is. So Gilnoble was on Like It Is, this road Like It Is, for 30 years. Now, there was this guy that did New Year's Eve rocking. New Year's Eve. There was a New Year's Eve party on December 31st, and one of these fellas was online for about 30 years, and he got this great big salutation. So I made a comparison. How is it that Gil Noble also been on television for 30 years and nobody wanted to celebrate it? Well, Elambe Brat in Harlem celebrated 30 years of Gil Noble being on Like It Is. And many of the great ones were out there. And Dr. Ben Clark, Ben Chavis, Conrad Muhammad, Atim, Barkim, Dr. Lewis's wife, important figure, importantly Dr. Lewis. And Sonny was there with Mrs. May, his wife. So when we left there now, Mrs. May was driving the car, she made this illegal turn, Sonny sitting in the back. It's like one of these three-seaters, and me and the guys in the back, and Sonny, and a couple pulled us over and gave her a ticket, everything. So we came now to a place called The Lab on Fulton Street, I think on Tompkins and Fulton Street there was a lab. So Sonny said, and you gotta be careful, when you see the big man taking the missus out, you gotta be respectful, right? So Sonny took the missus and his guys to the lab. And the guy at the door says, I gotta search you. Sonny said, you don't search me, I'm Sonny Carson. So go and tell the guy inside there, Sonny Carson's at the door. He goes in there, and the guy said, I never heard of him. You know, in Restoration on the eastern side, there was a club called Mahogany.
Yeah.
Mahogany downstairs.
Right.
Sonny got the guy, the owner, when they were closing the club, to give him all of the textured chairs that were in the lab. Right? Sonny was the mayor of Bed-Stuy. Right? So he was very upset that they slighted him in this manner. Right? So anyway, so the thing is that people like Sonny, they have to get their props. So they sent it to Danmore, and when the choir went out, Sonny's downstairs, the prison riot. Sonny was involved in a number of economic boycotts, protests, especially against Koreans who were not really, they were making a lot of money by selling fruits and vegetables, but they had a disdainful attitude toward the black customers, and Sonny didn't like that, especially in Church Avenue right here in Fulton. Sonny was a principal in bringing a congressional hearing to Medgar Evers College to investigate police brutality in the 90s. Yeah, right? Okay. He was also involved in a lot of activities that, you see, Barrera was saying about the significance of history. Malcolm always said history is a good teacher. But most of our young people, they don't know about history. But Sonny was involved in the Louima case, the Cato case, would you believe that when Secretary Brown was killed, Bill Clinton was the president. He wrote a letter to Sonny, said, don't come to the funeral. I mean, well, you know, this is how they viewed him in terms of what he was doing. Personally, I wrote 5 books on Sonny Carson. 4 of them completed. They're in the Library of Congress. I didn't release them. I'm considering putting them all together in a single volume. And as Barrera said in the beginning, these books they go over 800 pages. I don't have the money to do the funding to do the printing, what have you. And the fifth book that is not finished because it has a number of articles that I wrote in the newspapers after his death. So all of that is in the input tray on my desk that still has to be emptied. Because of his, the community, because of Sonny's contribution to the consciousness of his African constituency, when there was a tremendous funeral held at a church on Herkimer, right off of Nostrand Avenue over there. I can't really remember the name of the church. Big. Friendship Baptist. And then they gave him a parade from his beloved Brooklyn Bridge. When he was protesting, he brought his people up to Tillery and that corner there besides University Tech. And the cops came and said, listen, Mr. Carson, we can't let you take the bridge because, it will be chaos. So they say, you can stop here, but we can't let you get on the Brooklyn Bridge because there will be too much of issues that we can't deal with. So, like I said, Board 3 had named three blocks on Gates Avenue that was never materialized because the city council blocked it. And then again, Bill Clinton told him, don't come. Well, we are familiar with the phenomenon of the million movement. I've been to all of them. Million Man, I went with G2 and Kojo to Million Women March in Philadelphia. I went to Million Family, all the millions. Because of what Giuliani was doing, Sonny Carson, he was not a political person. He didn't like voting. But he decided he's going to vote when Giuliani was seeking re-election. And he launched this million voter registration program. So you see the guy's active, he's doing a lot of stuff. And we cannot allow his name and his influence and what he stood for to be forgotten. Just like how Ray mentioned the fact that Samuel held a commemoration for Dr. Clark after 25 years when he passed. And certainly Dr. Ben, I owe him, George, and Professor Rock to do whatever I can to keep their names alive. So, the bones that were repatriated back to Ghana, they represent a symbol. They represent a symbol, but there's more to it than that. Okay, so I've shown you first of all the discovery of the bones in Brooklyn. I've shown you that Pontifex decided to honor Sonny Carson's ancestor. Professor James Smalls speaks to the significance of the return of the runway, a symbolic gesture for all Africans. I say these when I was writing for the newspaper, and I recently had them put in lamination. This is a piece by Sonny.
Let me let the camera get it.
Entitled A Monument to Enslaved Africans. He wrote President Bill Clinton, "Dear Mr. President, is there any honor left for black vets buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard?" Short and sweet, and perhaps I should read it to you. Dear President Clinton, and it was dated May 30th, 1997, the White House. Dear President Clinton, we applaud your Memorial Day recognition Monday of the contributions of veterans who gave their lives for this country. Perhaps this is the time to also continue the kind of precedent you established recently in honoring the contributions of Black Congressional Medal of Honor winners by bringing recognition and respect for many other Blacks who have also sacrificed their lives in the defense of this country. I would like to take a special opportunity to ask that you consider extending this final recognition to 2,000 Black servicemen who also gave their lives in wars beginning with the French and Indian Wars in the early 1800s, to the Spanish-American War in 1898, and including the Mexican Civil Wars. These veterans now lay unrecognized in an all-Black cemetery in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in New York City. In 1926, 986 others were disinterred from this same location and be buried in the country's national cemetery at Cypress Hills in Queens, New York, also without any recognition and ceremony. It is a sad moment for us to have to use this opportunity to seek the long overdue respect earned by these veterans, but I'm sure you can agree that men who have served this country and have given their lives should also be given some kind of tribute. I am thanking you in advance and hope you can address this issue as soon as possible. Sincerely, Sonny Carson, Chairman, the National Committee to Honor Black Heroes. So, this is a letter, a form letter that Sonny asked that people sign that would be sent to Congress or Washington, D.C. to recognize these Africans. In 1926, a number of the bones were removed to Cypress Hills, but there were still others. So much so that in 1995, the Navy could find Samuel Carson's bone. Now, as you know, the Brooklyn Navy Yard was principally, in addition to the military aspect of it, a Black segregated cemetery. And when in the early 90s, the Navy decided it was going to divest of properties across the country, the Navy Yard was one on that list. And Sonny wanted that Black entities be given some of the spots or locations in the Navy Yard where he passed, and the people who followed him in the Committee on Black Heroes, they were not up to the task. So Rudy Giuliani, and then mayor, disposed of the property to other people, and we don't even have a footprint in the Navy Yard that used to be our home by virtue of the color of our skins.
Gave it to Jews, that's what we did. We gave it to Jews.
Well, okay, you know what I do. Okay, so I have the names of, okay, so the significance of, I'm like privy to this, but I was told that Sonny's family somehow got a lot of money from the Navy because those soldiers who died, they never received their final payment. Right? And over the years, a century, maybe two, of interest accumulated, no matter how small the wages were, could be considered millions. Right? Now, I have here the names of, I don't know if you're going to be able to get all of them, the names of some 250 veterans buried in Brooklyn Navy Yard. One of the earliest was a Marine buried in 1801. And when we see 44 or 98, we're not talking about 1998 or 1944. We're talking about 19th century. Okay?
Okay, hold it. Got it? Okay. And then all this is from the Daily that's the Afro Times.
Yeah, well, Afro Times, Daily Channel, and New American were the papers that I was writing for. 1 week I read 3. I was manning 3 newspapers.
Got it? Got it?
Why history is significant? Now these people's names have been resurrected from oblivion, and thanks to Mackey's History Club group, they're now going to be remembered forever. All we got to do is prove that any one of these people's progeny is in existence today, but you can't be doing trying to get over on the government because they're going to knock you down. But if you can legitimately prove that you are related to this person, and this person, and this person, the government owes you money.
Private Samuel Carson. Man, it has a few unknowns.
Yeah.
Date of birth unknown.
Yeah, that's true. I've got some others that I couldn't bring all of them. Well, as I said earlier, Sonny was involved in a number of other issues, right? So here he is with Sonny, Carson, Professor Smalls, Carlos Russell. He founded Black Solidarity Day. Ella McGrath.
Hold it. Got it?
Ella G2 Wilson. Joe Marshuriki, his brother. Santina Payton, before he Payton, his wife. She's still active today. I saw her a couple of weeks ago. Here's Sonny again. New York pays tribute to Malcolm.
All right, hold up. Lambe, son.
Herman Ferguson. Abdul Haq. Sonny Carson.
Khalid.
Elami Bad. Khalid Muhammad.
Got it?
Here is Sonny at his best. Arguing with the media show a white kid handcuffed. Some youth was made an infraction of the law, but his right to anonymity as a youth was betrayed in having been seen in handcuffs. Sonny was very, he said that every 70th precinct cop who heard Louima's screams must be fired or indicted. If you remember, Abner Louima, who was sodomized by whatever the name of the cop was, I think Bumpy. I think he just received release.
Straight. Hold it. All right.
Release recently.
Got it.
Black Solidarity Day that Carlos Russell initiated based on the work of Dr. Turner about blacks in the community who were doing all the sculling work. And one day they decided that they're not going to work today, and the town fell apart. So Black Solidarity Day became a result of that. And here is Carlos Russell, who created that, and Sonny and Haskins, this guy. This guy used to be have a little business on 125th Street outside of Adam Clayton Powell, Michael Hooper, and some of these other ladies. So he was very incensed, upset, that according to him, that he couldn't save Biggie and Tupac from being killed. Alright. One of the motivating things, and if you ever went into his office beneath, in the basement at Bed-Stuy, Restoration, he had this picture of these black men hanging from trees in the South. So, like I said, he was involved in a number of things. Here is a new beginning for Black Solidarity Day. I have a piece that I wrote on Black Solidarity Day that I share on. I overlooked it.
Got it?
This piece here is a letter to the president, again about the bones of Samuel Carson and the other black veterans who were buried in the Navy Yard.
Got it?
Because this piece is related to our topic today, I would like to read Sonny's letter. The following letter was sent to the White House this week by Sonny Abubadika Carson. He was called by an African chief, high official. Chief has a meaning, impact or meaning, but an African dignitary visited gave him this name, Abubadika, which means he who leads his people. Choppy used to call him AD because he couldn't say Abubadika. Too big a word. The following letter was sent to the White House this week by Sonny Abubadika Carson, chairman of the Committee on the Black Heroes. This letter suggests that President Bill Clinton, who wanted to present the 7 black heroes of World War II with a Medal of Honor, and the related stories on page 10. He said, "Dear President, we applaud." Oh, yeah, it's the same letter I read, right? But this is how it came out in the newspaper. Well, in that age of activism, if you will, when I was teaching, there were 3 people really that worked out of my school. We were called the 3 Musketeers. Myself, Gerald Joshua, and Dr. Black Felder. He's Jack Felder, but he was so black, they stopped calling him Jack and called him Black. So he wrote a number of pieces, one of which is the genesis
Hold up, let me get it.
of Father's Day.
Jack Felder, yeah? Got it?
The genesis of Father's Day. Betrayal by any name, any other name is still betrayal. And there's a piece here about supporting the Million Woman March in Philadelphia.
Mr. Filet?
You got it?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So Dr. Feller said, what do Tarzan, King Kong, and Showboat have in common? The show that they brought on. And finally, there were 2 million youth marches, one held in Harlem and one held on Fulton Street. The one in Harlem, Dr. Felder wrote this in response, said New York City cops riot at the end of the march. They didn't like what was going on. So I say most of these they're not deserved. And then I have this piece that I wrote myself called "You Can Do More" Queen Ames Nefertari.
Got it?
So, as I said, Bill Clinton told Sonny not to come to Ron Brown's funeral. So, after the bones got back to Ghana, Jerry Rawlins did two things. One was to launch the first Emancipation Day ceremony, August 1st. And second thing, he told Sonny that the Africans in America, the African Americans in America, are Africa's Trojan horse. That is to say, we are the people who are not only continuing the legacy, but guarding the legacy of Africa in America. And evidence of this is when Zahi Hawass came to this country last month, 6 weeks ago, and he was saying that the ancient Egyptians were not Africans, and there was an organized protest across the country, everywhere he spoke. It's interesting because I met someone called me and asked me if they can give this particular person my telephone number. I said, okay. So he calls me and he tells me two things. I said, man, you crazy or what? He said to me, I'm a friend of Zahi Hawass, and I'm a friend of Giuliani. In fact, I supported Giuliani against Dinkins. I said, wait a minute, I got 800 signatures for Dinkins, so you were against us back then. And then he tells me, Zahi Hawass is not the man. There are two Zahi Hawass. He didn't get to explain to me. He said there's a private Zahi Hawass and there's a public Zahi Hawass. And he's trying to tell me that the guy inside is not the same as the guy outside. But I just cut him out, shut him off, and stuff like that. But according to Jerry Rawlins, we are Africa's Trojan horse, and we are doing a very good job about it. Now, but Ray, I will take any questions that you have. I couldn't read this poem, but I'll take questions from anyone who wants any clarification of anything that I've said.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Fred Monderson, a great big hand. Okay, the first question is going to be from the Zoom audience. Anybody from the Zoom audience wants to ask Dr. Monderson a question? Zoom audience? Okay. Anybody from the floor wants to ask Dr. Monderson a question? Anybody from the floor?
Yes, can you explain what was the result of the Ocean Hill-Brownsville move? What was it about? And I know you said decentralization, but maybe somebody's not clear about what decentralization is. So can you explain that? And I know you said the majority of the people, I think you characterized it as black and Spanish. I know you meant Latino because people from Spain don't live in Ocean Hill.
Well,
They might speak Spanish, but they are not Spanish.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's correct. That's correct. Good point. What I meant is, I didn't want to say Puerto Rican because that was a cliche being used back 2 decades ago and what have you. But Latinos, black people speak Spanish,
right.
principally, right? So what decentralization meant is that instead of control from the Board of Education, local communities will have the say about who can be the principal, who can be the superintendent, and the question about whether or not they should have the right teachers to teach their children. Okay, so the end result was a lot of blacks being hired. Okay, and it changed the whole flavor of education in New York City. So much so that Dr. Castro was one of those who succeeded to being appointed by local community political groups and what have you. Superintendents, yes ma'am. Principals, vice principals, assistant principals, I mean, instead of vice, but same thing. And teachers too. Oh, thank you. So decentralization simply meant that local areas could control the school districts. So I think it was the school system was divided up into about 32 school districts, and each district had the right to elect to voting. And the voting is somewhat similar to what was being proposed right now, that people who are resident in New York City don't have to be a citizen to vote. They're voting as resident. They cannot vote in the presidential election. So people who had parents who had children in the school system could vote in the school board election. So I ran for school board in '86, and out of nowhere, obscurity rather, I almost won a seat. So Dr. Kushner, superintendent at the time, I said, Monderson, why don't you come and work for us? So I left Hunter College and City Tech. I teach in both places, and I went to work first at Walt Whitman, and then Gladstone Atwell, MS-61, and then ultimately 138 and stuff like that. So I taught in college. I did a stint at Edward R. Murrow. I didn't quote unquote make the cut because I guess they didn't want to hear. You see, Edward R. Murrow is a conduit for Russian women coming in, young women, Jewish women, to get an education and get a foothold in it. Somehow, yeah, I wasn't appealing as an activist, black guy or whatever, and I didn't make the cut after the first year. So I went back to MS-61, and I spent the rest of my year. So I ended up teaching for 26 years, and then I retired because I was getting tired. But it freed me up. I lost some of my wages, 25% of my wages, because I retired early. There was in the air 55-25, but it was illegal. And the next year after I retired, it became legal. If you reach 55 years and you had served for 25 years in the school system, you could get 2% of your principal, 2% of 50% of your principal, your last paycheck. So I lost out on that. But I came out from the honor. I was able to concentrate on my writings and stuff like that. And as a result of that, I wrote over, from that time to now, more than 30-some books. Anyway, I love the idea that you educate the community about the books that they should have. This is one of the books that I've just finished completing. I haven't released it. It is complete, but it's in holding. It's called Empower Your Child's Reading and Knowledge Through Black History Exercises. This is a book that it's a 12-volume set.
Hold it up straight. Let me get the title. Okay, got it?
Okay, It's divided into two, this one. And what I did was I made it principally in color. I paid $160 to print this so that I would have a color version of what the book I begin, sometimes you cut the deck and you get the right cards. Okay, this chapter is called Egypt and Our Youth. And I begin each chapter with the Egyptian hieroglyphic alphabet, trying to engage our people into learning how to write in Egyptian. And each chapter begins with 2 discovery questions, and it ends with 7 or 8 discussion questions. And they've got about 30, nearly more than 24 reading features that every young reader needs to know. And the book is inundated, I like using that word, but it's inundated with vocabulary, where I not only identify the vocabulary from the selections, I syllabicated, that is, they break it up syllables, give the parts of speech. I talk about the types of sentences, the comparison and contrast, synonym and antonyms, and you name it. If you want your son or your daughter, or even yourself, to learn to read properly so you can understand what it is that you're reading, whether it's your will or what, this is the book that you need. It's in a 12-volume set. And if you're in touch with museums and libraries, tell them to get this book. My address is Samual Publishing. Samual Publishers. Address.
Spell it for me.
S-U-M-O-N Publishers. P-U-B-L-I-S-H-E-R-S. Post Office Box 685. Post Office Box 1168. 11685. Brooklyn, New York, 11216. 11216. So the information is, of course, all of my other works. I've got about, as I said, the 5 books. I'm trying to put them together as a single book for Sonny Carson. It's going to be a huge, maybe 800 or more. But there's a lot of photographs of Sonny where I followed him all over, taking pictures of those important gatherings that he was a part of, whether it was a congressional hearing, it was the bones of Prospect Heights, Prospect Park, when he was examining some of the Underground Railroad sites, and several other things. But there you have it. So,
Okay, Zoom audience, anybody, any other questions? Any other questions from the Zoom audience? Any other questions from the floor?
I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
So, the work that Sonny Carson did, okay, years ago I learned, and in relating to Africa, there were some good, some lustrous, and some illustrious pages in our history. We need to eliminate the illustrious, the good and the bad, eliminate the bad, and focus on the good. However, Sonny Carson was pictured negatively for whatever reasons by people who didn't have his best interests in mind, and the people that he represented. Forget about those. Let us focus in on the good side of the man.
Yes, sir.
Because you are what you are. You cannot take away the fact that when we drive down Malcolm X Boulevard and the name of Malcolm X School on Utica Avenue, well, used to be Utica, but now Malcolm X Boulevard, and Marcus Garvey Boulevard, and Harriet Tubman, okay? This is the work of Sonny Carson. Two Circle of Chore over there on Empire Boulevard. This is the work of Sonny Carson. And they need to remember that we have to fight crack. And these are, is a crack that has a new, it's shed its deadly skin and comes in a new form. I think it's called fentanyl. So all of these things that he stood for, we must continue this struggle. And God willing, we will.
And one of his movie, The Education of Sonny Carson, is a must. I think they wanted to make it mandatory for the youth to see it. And it's a scene in the movie. He had been through Warwick and Whitwalk, School for Boys, and the gangs coming up. But in the end of the movie, after they had dumped the drugs in the black community, and the dreams of our youth and men dissolved with the drugs, it was like a plague going over all major urban cities in the United States, from South Central to Bedford-Stuyvesant. And Sonny came home and was disarrayed at what was happening. And his beautiful young lady he was with had them got trapped off in the web of drug addiction. She was a beautiful young lady portrayed in the movie. And when he came home, she had succumbed to drug addiction that the Italians and blacks, who we talk about so highly, and she said, "Get high with me." And Sonny Carson turned away and walked off into the sunset down one of the streets in Brooklyn, and he did not mess with them drugs. It would have been a different story if he would have followed and took one taste of it, because so many had took it. My family and other people and everything got caught up in it. And it just took every dream that black men had, black women and black families had to suffer. And it's still going on today. So if you get a chance, see, stuff like that you never hear. Who cares what some governor in Florida is talking about? You have to educate your kids yourself. The education of Sonny Carson is a must for every youth to see. Because the drugs is no joke.
That's a good point you make, Brother Ray. As Sonny told us, when the movie was finished and it was reviewed, one of the sponsors, I think, said to the producer, "I thought you was going to make a nigger film." There was a message in the movie that he didn't like. He was expecting to make, you remember the black, what do you used to call it?
Black exploitation films?
Yeah, you know, he was looking for one of those. But there's this message of this particular book was significant. Now, when I first wrote The Final Triumph, the first volume, everybody liked it. Okay? Everybody liked it. They wanted to make the sequel to The Education of Sonny Carson under the title of my book. Well, okay, first of all, let me tell you about this, because I was supposed to go to Ghana with Sonny, but I didn't get my ticket, right? He said I got my ticket. So I didn't hold that against him. I went ahead and published this centerfold in the Challenge. And then there's a follow-up version in the Afro Times, because I used to write for all three papers. Challenge, Times, and New America. And then when they came back, this guy, and I'm going to call his name, was close to Sonny, he said, "Yeah, let's grab that." And Sonny said, "No, This was Fred's own doing. That belongs to Fred Monderson. Of course it does. It's my photographs, it's my article, I published it. But no one could get this. Okay? So, the movie Education of Son Carson was in need of a sequel. So about 2 months ago or so, a fellow knocks on my door and he said, we want to do this movie on Sunday. And there is a guy in California, I'm talking raw. There's a guy in California that's got 50% of the information and you got 50% of the information. And we want you to get together and so that we can produce this movie. I listened to him, I didn't say nothing. And I thought about it. Okay, about 15 years before he died, son was in California and he did an interview with some guy and the guy must have given him some money for the interview or whatever. That's what they're talking about. Much of that, what he said in the interview, would have been in the movie Education Son Carson. So I said, wait a minute. I got all the information. I got the Bones information. I got the minutes of all the meetings. I got the photographs. I got everything about Sunday. Then now he comes back with another strategy, says to me, we want to do a 2-part series on Netflix on Son Carson. And we have a writer. We want you to sit down with this guy and tell him what to do, and you can write, you put it on Netflix. I told my daughter, she said, well, Dad, that's a lot of money. They want to make money off of Sunday, but they don't have anything. I said, talk to my lawyer. It's the same way. Are you familiar with the number of people who they were with Dr. Ben and making money off of Ben? You know, it's like, remember when Newt Gingrich said, I was in the room with Ronald Reagan. Well, some of these conference rooms in New York City could have 5,000 people. So you just wanted 5,000. So these people say, hey, yeah, man, I was with Dr. Ben all along. I never saw him. I saw Dr. Lewis and I saw Greg Hardy. And I was a student of Dr. Ben. So we got to be careful of the foolish people who push foolish ideas and those that seek to exploit us as we seek to set the record straight. Having said all of that, I want to thank everyone for being here with me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, give Dr. Fred Monderson a great big hand. He did an excellent job. I want to thank our Zoom audience who came out and supported the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. And I want to thank the members that came out in the live to listen to Dr. Monderson. So once again, you talk about worrying about somebody banning some books. Jeff Bezos ain't gonna never stop selling no books. And you can get the books to educate. Dr. Monderson has excellent books right here. We have the Amos collection. So books is everywhere. Books is everywhere. And it's funny how when these historians, Professor Mackey had thousands and thousands of books. A lot of the historians, you can't find these books. So that's something that we have to do for ourselves. So give yourself a great big hand. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Zoom audience, you can have some chat.